are interested in getting a tour or getting more information about what assisted living is. But thank you, and thanks to Lex Fund for this great collaborative relationship we have. We appreciate it. Thanks.
I want to thank you for having me next time, and also this is a lovely facility. And tonight we're going to be speaking about something that is near and dear to our hearts. If it's not affecting us yet, we may have heard about it affecting others. We're talking about the plight of bullying, which has become a national epidemic. We hear it out on the playgrounds, we speak about it in schools, we see it going on in backyards, playgrounds. It is all around us. And what is important to understand is that although we experience it, we speak about it, that intervention that gets spoken about is vitally important. But really what is at the heart of the matter is prevention. And how do we stop bullying before it starts? And that's hopefully what we can speak more. I will be speaking about this evening, and I really welcome to your questions and your thoughts at the end of the talk, or if there's something that's going on as we're going forward and you really would like to ask a question, please don't hesitate. Okay. Now, I am technologically challenged, so bear with me. Okay. Statistics are staggering. 13 million children are being bullied every year. 160,000 children miss school every day because of being terrified of being bullied. 1 out of every 4 children will be bullied at some point in their lifetime during elementary school, adolescence. So we're talking about 1 out of every 4 of you, your children, will be bullied at some time. And these are just reported statistics. Lots of experiences never get to be reported, and the numbers just become worse and worse. 80% of children who see bullying do nothing to stop it. We're also talking about children that have special needs, and they are more likely to be bullied 4 times as great as a child who doesn't have special needs. 42% of children have been bullied online. We hear about that in terms of cyberbullying all the time. And victims of bullying are 2 times as likely to commit suicide, which is even more staggering in terms of children who attempt suicide. And usually the attempters to the completers, kids around 10 times more, will attempt suicide than complete it. So tonight what we're trying to do is to really understand bullying, but understand bullying in the context of emotional intelligence. What does emotional intelligence have to do with bullying, and how does it really affect children who are both being bullied and children who are the people who are doing the bullying? We'll look at prevention and how do we stop it before it starts, as well as listening and hearing more about things that we can do as parents, as grandparents, as educators in helping our children and ourselves develop the skills that can prevent bullying. Okay, what is a bully? And this is really an important question because there is a lot of misconception about what a bully really is. What is important to remember is that bullying involves repeated aggressive behavior. It's not just one time that someone may have done something that has been disturbing and upsetting, maddening, but a child who does it repeatedly, and repeatedly with the intent to hurt, to humiliate, to harass, to harm, or to hold power over another person. Okay. What does a bully look like? A bully typically has difficulty expressing anger verbally. That typically the way they express very strong, uncomfortable, hostile feelings is in action. They need to have power over others. I think I'm going to use this. They usually have very low self-esteem, lack empathy, and typically may have been victims of abuse themselves, have witnessed bullying with others. The child who typically is bullied is a child who usually is more isolated, who has low self-esteem, and who is always afraid to ask for help. What does it look like when a child is being bullied? How do we know if our child is being bullied? I think that one of the things we need to look very carefully at is our child's behavior changing in any way? They're sleeping, they're eating, they're wanting to be with other children, they're not wanting to go to school. Do we see a difference in terms of their grades? Are their grades changing? Are they dropping? Are they gaining weight? Are they losing weight? All these are signs that something is going on for our child. They may be coming home with ripped books. They may be coming home with bruises. Again, these are all signs that something is going on for our child. How do we know if our child is a bully or if a child is a bully? Typically, a child who does bullying uses a lot of aggression and violence to express their anger. They're hot-tempered, impulsive, they're easily frustrated, and they're good at talking their ways out of difficult situations. They often break rules, and they have a hard time with accepting limits. There's a lot that's being done to raise awareness of bullying. And we see that in the film that came out last year, Bully by the Weinstein Brothers, which was a very powerful documentary. And it really looked at 5 children's lives across the country as victims of being bullied and what went on within the homes and also the schools in terms of having to deal and face the realities of what was happening to these children and the families. There are public figures that are out there speaking about bullying. In addition to President Obama, there's Lady Gaga, there's Ellen, there are lots of people who have taken this on as a mission. And usually many people that take it on as a mission, you will hear that they themselves at one point in their own lives had been bullied and recognize the torture and the pain that existed and that they really want to take a stand and try to do something to change it. In the legislation, there are lots of anti-bullying policies that are developing in the schools as a way to intervene and to try to stop bullying from continuing. There's a lot of pros and cons about, well, how do you deal with it? And people talk about, well, you know, maybe some of the rules that go on in the schools should involve punishing the bully. However, what research is showing is that punishing bullies doesn't change the behavior. And what we're going to be talking more about this evening are things that hopefully can change that behavior. Okay, so then how do we do this? We do this by helping our children develop skills in emotional intelligence. What is that? What is emotional intelligence? We've heard a lot about IQ in terms of intellect and when we think about intelligence. And we hear now about EQ, emotional intelligence. And yet what's important to understand is that intellectual intelligence, the IQ, where people used to think that that was responsible for success all the way through, what we're finding now is that 80% of success, lifelong success, academically, interpersonally, personally, is a result of emotional intelligence. That IQ really accounts for only 10 to 20% of one's success. Emotional intelligence means it's a heightened self-awareness. How do we feel? Becoming more aware of what our feelings are, being able to discriminate between feelings of anger and sadness. That is a real tough one. Oftentimes you may hear people talk about feeling sad when in fact they're feeling angry. What we've learned in terms of growing up, that sometimes anger is a really hard feeling to be able to talk about and talk about freely. So people choose not to. So becoming aware of our emotions emotions is very hard, and that's one thing that's very important. Better ability to manage the intensity of what we feel. Being able to regulate the intensity of what we feel is very important. And being able to become sensitive to the emotions of others. These are all traits that are very central to becoming emotionally intelligent. So why is it important? When we're talking about emotional intelligence, we're talking about cultivating emotional intelligence at a young age. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Because when you're able to cultivate these skills early on, what you're talking about is being able to impact a child's character and moral development. It's really education for character and moral development. And it really helps children determine whether they feel good within themselves and with relationships with their friends, with others in their world, how a child understands himself or herself, and also how a child gets along with others in terms of their interpersonal relationships. When talking about introducing these skills at a young age, a question always comes up as to why. Why does it matter? Well, there is a lot that's going on within the first 3 to 5 years of life in terms of the brain. And children really begin to learn a lot in terms of laying the foundation for all learning in areas of emotions, socially, intellectually, and neurologically. And what is happening during this period of time with the brain is what one refers to as neuroplasticity. And what that means is that the brain is continuing to develop into our 20s, but there is a very sensitive window within the first 3 to 5 years of life where the child's day-to-day experiences, both at home and at school, can actually impact and shape the emotional and social circuits within the brain, and particularly within the area of the brain that we refer to as the prefrontal cortex. This period of time is when the brain is most malleable to these day-to-day experiences, and they do, in fact, help strengthen the ability for children to deal and manage with distress. This is the area that we're talking about, which is referred to as the executive center, executive functions, which involve attention, focus, impulse control, decision-making, problem-solving, all these very important skills that are critical not only in how we relate to one another in our interactions, how we do academically, and how we're able to be successful within ourselves. When children can become aware of these emotions, when they can learn how to express these emotions and cope with the emotions, that all that energy that typically is used when we're worrying, when we're upset, when we're distressed, all that energy becomes freed up. And that freedom of energy then can be focused on learning and being able to problem solve and develop new concepts and new ideas. So these fundamental skills involve expressing, understanding, and managing emotions. They're involving helping to develop emotion regulation, being able to regulate the intensity of how we feel, deal with that in ways that is constructive and not destructive. When a child sometimes becomes very riled up and they become really upset, oftentimes children express their feelings in action. And what we want to help happen is we want to help rechannel what gets naturally expressed in action. They get angry, push, pinch, pull, to be able to rechannel those emotions in constructive ways with words, with gestures. Utilizing empathy, self-control, problem-solving, anger management, and conflict resolution are skills that are created when children learn how to deal with and manage their emotions in successful ways. At beginnings at the school, we teach children within the first year of life how to begin to develop these emotional and social competencies. And we do this in a variety of ways. We do this by first talking about what the feeling is, and we do this by showing visuals of different faces, because children begin to recognize a smile, a frown, and then beginning to attach a meaning to those visuals. When do we feel happy? And giving a situation, I feel happy when mommy and daddy come to pick me up. I feel happy when I see grandma and grandpa. When do we feel mad? I feel mad when I can't get the treat that I'm wanting. So that they begin to connect that there is a cause and effect, that there is a reason that we have feelings. The feelings just don't come from the sky. Feelings are driven by how we experience things in our life. And our actions and our behavior are driven by our emotions. So understanding these emotions is really critical, as well as understanding that emotions is what connects us. They're central in all relationships and in relating. If we didn't have these emotions, there would not be connections that we would be developing. So the first thing is to recognize and identify what I'm feeling. The next thing is to be able to help children begin to express how they're feeling in constructive ways, as I was mentioning a moment ago. Be able to encourage and permit their ability to express the fact that I'm mad. That's okay. Or I'm sad. That is okay. Giving permission to feelings. Oftentimes, particularly with boys, oftentimes an adult will say, well, you know, he's a real buddy and he doesn't need to feel sad about that. You know, he's tough, he can toughen it up. But all children, whatever gender they all have these feelings, and all feelings are fine. And this is what we teach children. They're all fine. It's what we do with them that matters and makes the difference. So how we express them, we can express them with hugs, with smiles, with frowns, and that's really important so children begin to learn how to recognize what somebody else may be feeling in developing these skills of empathy and compassion and kindness. So beginning to be able to recognize is very important. Being able to verbalize, as I was saying, what they're feeling. And then being able to demonstrate empathic involvement in an interaction with somebody else, such as kissing a baby sister when they fall or when they have a boo-boo. Being able to understand the difference between feelings. Understanding that sadness is when I can't go to my friends and have a play day. Mad is when something that I want is taken away from me. Being able to understand that when mommy or daddy come home from work with a smile on their face, it means that they had a good day. If they come home with a frown on their face, something's up. So it's really being able to cue in and to recognize and discern what is going on. Again, I can't talk about this with more impact than understanding regulation is a key component. Being able to manage and deal with the distress of what we feel is critical. And teaching children how to do that early on is essential. When children can do that, they are much more successful in being able to connect and communicate and move forward. Good teachers are like good parents, and vice versa. All children need to be loved, they need to be accepted, and they need to be understood. And if we can keep this in mind as we go forward, it really can help us in terms of how we connect and engage with children. Our kids develop in the context of a relationship. They develop in terms of watching us, observing what we do, being able to imitate, also how we model, coach, and how we respond to our children's behavior. That this is very important in terms of responding to children in a very true and real manner. Oftentimes children may come up to us, and if we're feeling distressed, a child may say to us, or they may say to mom, "Mom, are you okay? Mommy, are you okay?" And our intent to not try to burden our child with any kind of problem that we may be feeling, we may say, "Yes, I'm fine." And yet a child is seeing on your face or in our body you don't look fine, you don't seem to be happy like at other times. Something is wrong with this picture. And what that leaves our child with, when we have that kind of inconsistent message with what we're saying and what we look like, is that the child ends up becoming confused at best, and at worst, ends up feeling like, I'm not sure I can trust what I'm feeling. I'm not sure I can trust what I'm picking up. And that is not a message we want to give to our kids. We really want them to be able to trust what they're picking up so that they can respond and react appropriately. As I said, at the heart of emotional intelligence is emotion regulation. Helping our kids learn how to manage their emotions is influenced by how we respond.
There's a lot of seats over here. People are piling up to the doors.
Helping our kids learn by how we respond and how we react to them is critical, as I was saying a moment ago. And how do we do this? When we accept our children's feelings, it helps our kids to reduce the emotional intensity that they're feeling. If you think to yourself, when you're feeling anxious or upset, and your partner or your friend is there and they say, really, I can understand how you're feeling, versus why are you feeling that way? That is ridiculous. That when our feelings are accepted, what happens is it reduces the intensity of how we feel, and we're able to feel more calm and then more available to deal with a situation. By offering choices to our kids when they're feeling upset, increases their ability to accept limits. Accepting feelings, I just want to go back to that for a moment, is not the same thing as accepting behavior. And that's a real important distinction. Encouraging our children's participation in solving a problem is very important, because it also allows our child to feel a sense of responsibility, as well as helping them to develop some self-control. If they're instrumental in coming up with solutions to a problem, they feel that, you know, they're part of the contract, and it's more important for them to follow through than if something is just imposed upon them. It also encourages their ability to develop their own ideas about how to resolve problems and how to come up with solutions. Giving reasons also as to why it is not okay when we set a limit with a child helps them to not only understand better, but understanding that it's not just a power thing. There are reasons why it's not okay to run out on the street. And the reason is because I need to keep you safe, versus I'm just your parent and I'm just saying that this is how it's going to be. So children begin to understand that there are reasons connected with, reasons connected with what we say to them. This is an example of accepting feelings. My turtle is dead. He was alive this morning. And Dad says, now don't get so upset, honey. And she is obviously getting upset, and he says, don't cry, it's only a turtle. And she begins to cry more and more, and he says, stop that, I'll buy you another turtle. I don't want another turtle. Now you're being unreasonable. Now, how many times has that happened to us in trying to deal with our child who's become upset about something? Another reaction is, my turtle is dead. He was alive this morning. Oh no, what a shock. He was my friend. To lose a friend can hurt. I taught him to do tricks. You two had fun together. I fed him every day. You really cared about that turtle. What is the difference here? Empathy, yes. And what does that allow our child and our kids to do, which they end up not doing enough, and we get frustrated about that later on? It allows our kids to start to open up and to talk more and to share more about what is going on for them. Because when we open a door by accepting their feelings with understanding and empathy, it allows them to feel that they can open up more, that they can talk more, that, hey, Mom and Dad, you guys get it. You understand that this was a really hard thing. And if you understand that, then I can take that chance and take another step forward and even tell you more stuff about what's going on in my life. Now again, keep in mind, we're talking also about bullying or being bullied. If we can set a foundation for children to feel safe and secure in talking with us and opening up at a very young age, we're setting that stage through one of the more difficult periods in our lives with our children, which is that of adolescence. And so if our kids know that we get it, we understand, and even though they'll put the brakes on with certain things, if they know that we are on their side, and that doesn't mean that we agree with them with everything, but that we really want to understand to help them work through whatever may be going on, they'll feel connected and they won't feel alone. And a lot of times what ends up happening in bullying situations is that children end up feeling that something is wrong with them and alone and disconnected. And we need to keep that connection available for our kids. Be offering choices. Now, for parents that have really little ones, one of the bigger battlegrounds is overeating and also overdressing. Instead of asking the child, you know, is it okay if you wear this polka dot shirt, and you ask them a yes or no question, if you're opening up a yes or no question, be prepared for a no. Versus, are you in the mood for your gray pants or your red pants? So you're not giving the child the opportunity to say no, you're framing the choice, and within that choice, that child is going to choose one. And what that does for your child is it allows your child, again, to feel a sense of control. They are participating in this decision. This is big. This is huge. They get really excited about it, and they feel that also you respect and value their choices. And that, again, allows them to feel more empowered and more in control. And again, if we go back to the bullying, one of the things that we talked about a moment ago is that one of the feelings that is not being experienced is feeling in control. Would you like half a glass of juice or a whole glass of juice? Not whether or not would you like juice. Or milk, whatever it may be. We're leaving in 5 minutes. Do you want to go on the slide one more time or on the swing? How often do we struggle with our kids getting them off the playground? And by offering the choice of what they can do allows them again to feel that they have a say in what is happening. It does work. When we encourage our children's participation, instead of when our kids are acting out that we need to feel like we need to carry them out of the market, instead of saying you're acting like a wild animal, no TV for you tonight, another way that would be helpful is it would be helpful if you picked out 3 big lemons for us. Mommy, where are you going? Shopping. I want to go. Not today. Why not? You tell me why. Because I ran around the store? You guessed it. So allowing the child to know there are consequences for things that go on without having to get angry about it, but that there are consequences for certain behaviors and that we need to follow through and be consistent so they know that we mean business. All right, so bringing emotional intelligence and bullying together. Children with emotional intelligence have empathy, compassion, awareness and understanding of their own emotions and the emotions of others. Bullies lack emotional intelligence. They lack the ability to be empathic, to be able to communicate effectively in terms of their emotions and their ability to recognize what is going on, becoming sensitive to the emotions of others. Emotional intelligence also gives the bullied kids skills to stand up and say no. When children are developing these skills, they also develop a feeling of confidence as well as resiliency. the skills that allow the bullied child to develop, as I said, is self-confidence, resiliency, and being able to problem solve. And the child who is the bully, when they're developing these skills as well, is learning skills of empathy, compassion, and self-control. You know, oftentimes when a child is being the bully, they are met with, understandably, a lot of anger. We want to punish, we want to have zero tolerance, but what's important to keep in mind, if we really want things to change, we have to understand where the bullied child is coming from in order to be effective in helping that child no longer to be the bully. And that is by helping them to learn these skills and becoming more understanding, not only of their own emotions and how to more effectively communicate them, but also becoming sensitive to what their behavior, how that impacts a friend or another child or another person in their life. So communicating effectively with our children about bullying means we need to be available, we need to listen. And listen means really listening to what is being said or not being said, because both are really important. We need to listen in terms of looking and watching, because oftentimes our kids may not tell us with their words what's going on, so we need to become real good detectives in figuring it out, and that's by listening with both our eyes and our ears. Accepting the feelings, which allows them to feel connected, and also helping them with problem solving. It's important that we help our children develop these skills instead of doing it for them. We can't be there to fix it for them. But what we can do is help them develop the skills where they can take more control and figure out ways to solve problems with our help and with our guidance, but also with their input as well. And that gives them the confidence to start being able to trust more that their ideas and their thoughts are being not only heard, but respected and working. What matters in successful parenting? Parents need to be aware of and recognize emotion as an opportunity for talking and sharing. And oftentimes in talking to thousands of parents over the years, one of the things that I've heard is that as much as they all love their children, what gets in the way of really being there and being able to talk with their children are heated emotions, when emotions are unplugged. And that has to do not only with emotions can be difficult to deal with, but also if we think about what we've learned growing up. And oftentimes what we've learned growing up is that anger, as one example, is something that you either stuff or we've seen people explode with it. That we didn't oftentimes learn that there are effective and appropriate ways of dealing with anger that can be successful. So we have to think about our own ways of handling things and what we learned growing up, and whether it worked or didn't work, if we liked it or didn't like it, and how effective can we be with our own children and becoming more aware of how we deal with our own emotions, how we express them in ways that, again, our children are watching us and we are models for our children. So the patterns that we communicate in our own behavior are typically patterns that our children will pick up, because not only are they seeing it, but we are responding to them with those same patterns. And if we want our children to develop more helpful ways, more appropriate ways of interacting with others and communicating what needs to be communicated more effectively and constructively, we also need to kind of take a look at ourselves and how we're doing it with our children and how we can become more emotionally intelligent as well. And we can, and it works, and it is really the most important and helpful gift we can give not only to ourselves, but to our children as well. Being able to empathize, validate their feelings, to be able to soothe them, guide them, help them label and identify their emotions, setting limits is really important. When children are more emotionally intelligent, it makes a tremendous difference. Studies, research over the years has shown that children with these skills are much more confident and resilient in their lives and in their interactions. They are much better able to concentrate, attend, do well academically, have much more successful peer relationships, have better physical and emotional health, and are much less prone to acts of aggression and violence. This is huge because what we're talking about here, although we're talking about bullying this evening, which is very important, skills of emotional intelligence go way beyond bullying. Skills of emotional intelligence really help us with being much more successful in our day-to-day interactions, in our communications, academically, in terms of being able to concentrate and attend better because we don't have all that energy absorbed in our anxieties and our worries and our distress because we've learned how to express it and deal with it more effectively. And also in terms of health, not only emotional health, but our physical health, because our emotions and our bodies are so intertwined. So this is huge. People talk about creating a new attitude and a new culture, and that is really important. Bullying is not only about us as parents talking with our kids, but we're talking about an entire culture here. We're talking about an entire environment that needs to be safe and needs to be stable for our children. So in doing that, we need to talk about how our supportive and community relationships among all adults are central. We're talking about teachers, administrators, bus drivers, coaches, and children. A lot of things happen on the buses. A lot of things happen out on the field. A lot of things happen in bathrooms. I mean, it happens all over. We need to really bring all the adults together and develop a culture and a community where everybody is understanding what is important and how to effectively instill these skills with our children. Adults need to lead by example and help our children by what we say and by what we do. The verbal and the behavior really needs to be consistent. That is vital. Schools need to have clear procedures for reporting and investigating bullying, and students and parents need to develop these skills themselves. As parents, we can help our children by recognizing and responding to bullying, teaching friendship skills. Children with at least one friend are less likely to be bullied. So developing friendships and having a friend with us is much more helpful. Teaching the social skills, not to be too passive or too aggressive, but be able to stand up and communicate what is important for us to be able to say. And teaching children to be socially responsible in terms of teaching them upstander skills. So what's an upstander? Well, a bystander is somebody who witnesses bullying passively, and 80% of children, or adults too, are bystanders. Upstanders does something to stop it and become much more socially responsible, and about 20% of children, and perhaps adults too, are upstanders. We need to turn these bystanders into upstanders. And what does it mean to be an upstander? It means to support the bullied child in private, showing concern and kindness, being there when we see a child or a friend being bullied, to be able to be there and be supportive. Stand with a child who's being bullied and say something to mobilize others to join in and to stand up to the bully is very important. And to befriend the bullied child and reach out to him and or her friendship. Also to alert an adult, and that is really important. There are times where an adult has to be brought in, and to be able to go to an adult and say that there is a problem is helping. It's not squealing, which oftentimes children are afraid of. You know, if I go to the adult and talk about what's happening, I'm not being a good friend, I'm squealing on them, but you are helping, and you are helping to get that child the assistance that they need. I rushed through that because I really want to be respectful. I know a lot of you need to leave by 8 o'clock, but I do want to open this up to all of you in terms of questions you may have, whether you have bullying or emotional intelligence.
Sorry. Okay, the last part about being upstanding. Sometimes I get confused how to teach my children when is the right time to step in. You know, it's hard for them to kind of figure out, you know, is that person okay? Do I need to step in? Am I going to look like, you know, too aggressive? You know, my daughter's in first grade, and I really know how to tell her when's the right time to step in.
I think when we ask our children too, you know, it's one thing to be, you know, telling our children information, but when we talk with them, it's also getting their ideas and asking your daughter, you know, how she feels about what's going on and what some ideas she may have about it. And being able to guide her with those ideas is really helpful. There isn't a right or wrong time in terms of whether it's too soon or too late, but if a child sees another child being hurt, that's when it really makes sense for somebody to come in and say, that's not okay. That's not okay to do. You're hurting their feelings. We teach that to the children, you know, when they're 3 years old, that if a child calls another child a name that hurts that child's feelings, you know, a friend can step up and say, that's not okay, that's not a nice thing to do. And by addressing that early on, brings the attention to the child who's doing it, instead of getting away with it and becoming, you know, talking or saying more hurtful things to the child. You know, when they have other children coming up to them and saying, that's not okay, typically the child begins to stop, because peer pressure is probably one of the most powerful pressures for a child. If that doesn't work, then you get the teacher or adult to be able to step in, but not to let it continue to go on when you see a child being visibly hurt.
Yeah, I think at this point, I kind of told my daughter, when you see someone being physically hurt, I think I feel more comfortable in telling her to tell adults. You know, I wouldn't ask her to step in there. If you see someone running at a teacher, it's similar to the, you know, double D's, destructive and dangerous. I still kind of put that on her at that young age and say, if you see someone being physically hurt, I suggest you get an adult. If it's someone's name calling, or you feel someone's being isolated, then, you know, you feel comfortable doing that, going up and helping out to do it, you know, feel comfortable. And I think at that young age, probably, when you get to the teen years in high school, then it's a little bit less of that, but.
Right. I think that's important, because there's the physical hurting, and then there's the emotional hurting. And oftentimes the emotional hurting can be a lot more painful than the physical.
I was just interested in this topic of bystanderism anyway, because it's actually a lifelong problem throughout life. Adults have struggled with when do you want to be a bystander, an active bystander versus a passive bystander. And it's as old as history. But your school handles it beautifully, because you've actually already told the children ahead of time that they can safely be upstanders. So they can step up to the plate and nothing's going to happen. Their peer group just says, well, that's normal. And it's not always the case.
That's right.
So that the environment is a safe environment. So I guess you're right, is the parent has to be open the lines of communication, because there's no one answer. The only good thing about it is it sheds a light on the situation to communicate, because there is no one answer. Every situation is so different.
That's right. And that communication between the parent and the child, keeping those channels open is critical. Because that is a way where children will be more apt to share with you, and depending upon the situation, because all situations are different, you can help guide them in terms of what you think could be very helpful and useful in that situation.
And you see, just in teenagers, the stakes go up so fast.
That's right.
I mean, look at Steubenville, how many, you know that there's at the alleged rape, 2 kids involved, it was rationed out peer pressure. The real question is, what was going on with all the bystanders? That was probably one of the more interesting questions, because so many bystanders doing nothing.
That's right.
And if they started early on, kind of discussing that this is tough, you don't try to feel scared about doing, you know, things, you gotta be assessing it.
And that's historical. I mean, that has been going on for centuries in terms of people, you know, staying on the sidelines and watching some horrible, horrific acts take place. But there needs to be a point where people can kind of step up and say, this is what's happening, we need to stop it, and we need to change this. And, you know, group psychology is very different than one-on-one, because when people get into groups, they're kind of watching and waiting for somebody to say, nobody is stepping up. So that kind of gives them a silent message that, you know, not to step up. But when you're on a one-on-one, it's different than when you're in a group mass. Yes?
What words would you recommend a parent use for their child in accepting the feelings that when they are being bullied, initially when the first interaction, when they start to tell their mom and dad what's happening at school, and they're telling the teacher, but what words would you recommend a parent say or talk to their child with when something like that happens?
So your child is actually telling you what is going on.
Right.
And they're basically describing, someone is making fun of me. Well, that must.
Or hitting them.
Or hitting them. That, it must be very hurtful, and that's not okay for someone to be hitting you, and that must feel horrible. Let's think together what we can do about this problem, because this is a problem, and I want to help you solve this problem. We don't want to leave our child alone with it to try to figure out on their own. We want to recognize out loud with the child, this is not okay, number one, and it is a problem, number two, and we're going to try to solve this problem together. And it leaves the child, again, your child, feeling connected and not alone, and that you are there to help them work through this problem. And it may end up being that the solution is that you end up going to the teacher together and sharing with the teacher something that's going on. It may be a friend that is turned against, and this happens a lot, a friend that turns against them because it's another friend that came into the picture, and when there's three people, it causes very interesting, sometimes very painful dynamics, so that it may be, you know, calling your friend and letting your friend know how you're feeling in terms of what she or he has done. In terms of them already having a friendship and being able to articulate to that friend how they're feeling. And that is really important and helpful in helping our kids begin to understand friendships are not just sharing wonderful, fun moments together. Friendships, true friendships, is when you can share with a friend also difficult things and when you don't like something that a friend did. And that is important to be able to let your friend know you don't like what they did.
Are there any quick tips you would recommend that the child, say a first grader, would be able to use in the school on their own? If there's school administration is involved in the situation, and it's a continual thing, it's a daily thing. So this other child notices, oh, we're going, it's a transition period, no one's watching us at this moment, and then does something to the victim.
To be hurtful.
What would be the tools that the first grader could have to handle that situation when no one's looking, and what would be empowering for them?
The first tool, if no one is looking, is just for her to articulate, or him to articulate, this is not okay. I don't like what you're doing. I want you to stop it. That's the first. If that doesn't work, then it may be that she or he is with a friend and they both share that. If that doesn't work, then to be able to say something to the teacher, that is not okay. And all those three things are really important and can be very effective and need to be communicated.
And consistently working on that, consistently.
That's
going
right.
through, yeah.
And giving them permission to know that this is not only okay, but this is important. It's important because the behavior of this other child is a not okay behavior.
Right.
It's hurtful, and if they're doing it to you, they're doing it to others too. And that's not okay.
Thank you.
You had a question?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, as far as, you know, I've been in situations where I've discussed with my child, similar to what Kara was just saying, as far as scenario, trying to give them tools, and at what point do you think going, and sometimes I've been in a situation where I felt that the teacher was very on it and was very receptive to hearing from parents about this type of thing, and then other situations where it
Kids will be kids.
Right, kids will be kids, so,
Right.
and sometimes I get stuck where I feel like I'm given the tools and trying to down the scenarios and trying to talk, role play with my child, and I just know what advice you had as far as with the school and kind of
Well-
when you feel like you should go,
When the teachers aren't listening,
yeah.
then it's time to go to the principals. Okay, because this is something that teachers need to start paying attention to. And kids will be kids, not in this way, because we don't want our kids to be kids by having to fend and be in fear and fight and flight. That's not kids being kids. So that is something where it may have to be taken to the principal. I know of situations where parents have called parents of the child to try to talk with them if they've had a relationship, if the kids have had relationships, and the parent knows the parents. They may get on the phone and they may decide to have, a meeting together where the parents are there and they bring the kids together and be able to problem solve this together, and the parents and the adults, take responsibility for pointing out this behavior is not okay, why? And what is another one? What are you trying to communicate to this person? What are you wanting to say to them? Let's find another way for you to say that it's not hurtful. Yes?
At the same time, when it's the very early child education setting, like 3-year-olds,
Yeah.
where they are still, kids will be kids, they do hit, and as the educator, we obviously immediately explain how that's not okay, but how do you suggest dealing with, because kids remember certain things about the day, and so when a child goes home and says, Bobby hit me today, to a parent, obviously that sounds terrible. You don't want your child going to school and getting hit, but bringing it to the teachers, we're aware of it and we're dealing with it. What are the semantics of working out that, like, we're not breeding a bullying
That's right.
scenario, but
That's a great question.
okay.
What we do, for example, with preschoolers, we have peace tables, okay? And when there's an altercation between two children, the teachers will bring the children to the peace table. And the peace table actually is a table, and there are rules that the children have to follow, and they're guided by the teacher, okay? So the teacher is involved in this process. And the first rule is that they have to talk about what the problem is, what happened. Then they have to listen to what their friend says about it, because they may come in with 2 different stories. Then they have to be able to express how they feel about what happened. And each child has to talk about the feeling that resulted from the situation that occurred. And then they are told they need to think of alternative ways to solve the problem. Alternative ways that will not inflict hurt or harm on a child, because that's not what we want to do with our friends. If we want to communicate something that's hard to communicate or to share, then we have to find a different way of doing it. So if the children can't come up with those ways right away, the teacher will suggest a way. And then we'll have the children, there may be 2 different ideas or alternative suggestions that are posed. We'll have the children choose one of them. It goes back to, offering choices. We'll have the child and the kids choose one plan and follow through in terms of resolving the conflict. So what we're communicating here is that stuff happens. Problems happen, altercations happen, but there are ways to deal with it, and there are ways to resolve the problem and move forward. And what ends up happening is that oftentimes this becomes so important for the child, because they finally are experiencing a way where problems are happening. The adults are listening. They're not only listening, but they're helping us solve these problems, and we're finding ways how do we solve this problem, and then they're moving forward. And these become so important to the kids that they go home with these rules to the peace table, and they're saying, my sister and brother, they're fighting all the time. I'm going to bring these rules home so that they can learn how to work out their problems. And we'll have parents coming into the school, and they'll say, me and my husband got into a tiff last night. Johnny came up to us and said, Mom and Dad, you guys have to go to the peace table and work this out. But what is happening here is that children are learning stuff happens. Altercations are happening, problems are happening, but there are ways to work it out. And it gives children the confidence that when they are met with these challenges, and challenges are going to happen no matter how much we are trying to protect our children, be there for them, intervene, try to give them the best of the best, stuff is going to happen. when we're not there. And what we can do, and what we hope to do, is to provide those skills for our children that become part of who they are, so that when they are not with us, they feel confident and able to deal with the situations that they're confronted with all the way through. Yes?
This is a great story, the peace table. It's very sophisticated negotiating skills you're teaching for little kids. It's
Yeah.
incredible. Can you give an example of one that was particularly amusing of how it worked out? Like if the
Well,
girl's
I'll give
really
you one that
verbal-
was very upsetting to all the children in the
Okay.
classroom. It was a 3.5-year-old. And this child was really struggling and really became, quote, in quotes, the bully in the classroom. And you know, this child, oftentimes when children would be drawing, he'd go and he'd take the paper and he'd rip it up. Or a child would be building towers and he would go and he would kick it down. Or he would say not nice things to the children. So one day during lunchtime, children were all together, and this is a
Can I
time
interrupt really quickly? Would you go to the peace table for every one of those situations?
we would try if we
Try,
could
okay.
get there.
As much
okay?
as reasonable.
As much as is possible, we would try, okay? So, but this is building up, so even though we're going to the peace table, it's continuing to happen, okay? So, and there are some kids that this, you know, it depends on what may be going on for a child in terms of stresses in his or her life. So the children are all at the lunch table, and this is a very social time, and they're all sharing, and these kids have also been encouraged to share their thoughts and their feelings. So one child says, I don't want Billy in our class anymore. He is mean. And another child steps up and says, I don't want Billy in the school anymore because he rips up my papers and destroys my towers. Another child steps in and says, I don't want Billy in the world anymore because he's so hurtful to me. The teacher intervenes, and Billy is, and I'm disguising the child's name, of course. Billy is sitting there, and he's like in shock. Why are my friends saying these things about me? He doesn't have a clue as to why they're feeling this way about him. The teacher comes in at the lunch table. We don't move them to the peace table, but it's at the lunch table. And the teacher says, well, Billy, what do you think about what your friends are saying? And Billy says, why are they so mean to me? And the teacher says, well, they're feeling really hurt about the things that you continue to do, when you rip up their papers, when you knock over their towers, when you say mean things to them. And they are feeling really upset, and they don't want to play with you. Oh, I don't want that. This is Billy. I want to be able to be their friend. I want them as friends. The teacher says, well, what you're doing isn't wanting them to be friends, isn't wanting them to want to be your friend. So what is a way, and what can you do so that the children, that these friends want to continue to be your friend? So then we start coming up, and the children then start, well, you can build with me instead of taking my blocks from my tower, or you can draw next to me instead of taking my paper and ripping it up. And so Billy is hearing these things, and he's saying, okay, I want to be your friend. And so the teacher then says, is there somebody who would be able to be Billy's friend now and be out in the playground with him? So one of the children, who's really a confident child in the classroom, she says, okay, I will be Billy's friend. And Billy says, well, if you'll be my friend, then will you carry my jacket when we go outside? And she looks down, and she says, okay. And she takes his jacket, they go outside. Well, Billy is having a great time out in the playground, because here he has a friend, and he's had a hard time making friends, and this child is out playing with him, comes back in the classroom, and Billy is beaming. He is so excited. And when the opportunity comes, when another child is drawing on a paper, Billy goes and he stops himself from doing what he typically will do, and he sits down and he looks around and he gets the crayon and his own piece of paper, and he sits down and he starts to make a picture. And the teacher says, Billy, you're doing a great job, recognizing the change and rewarding him for it, and letting the other children know that he is really trying to be a good friend. So this is an example of what can happen with 3.5-year-olds in terms of the seeds of bullying, and I've seen it over the last 30 years, can can start as young as 3, but also can be prevented at an early age. When we're able to help children begin to recognize what the feelings are, the impact it has on others, and how to start to manage and deal with them in much more appropriate and constructive ways. This can start to happen then, and that's really important. We get feedback too, because we've been around for almost 30 years. So we get feedback from principals, teachers, junior high school, with kids that have gone through our program, and they say that children that have gone through the program, our program, have been instrumental in mitigating against bullying situations. That they stand up and they intervene, and they say, hey guys, this is not okay. Because they've learned very young that this is something that is important and central, and they have the confidence to do it. And that's something that the bully reads. When a child stands up, if the child isn't standing up with confidence, the bully reads that. And then that's typically when they come back to that child. But if a child is not afraid of the bully, because they're beginning to understand, hey, you know, why this guy is doing what he's doing, and responds to him, the bully oftentimes will just kind of, wow, I'll get back away.
The term confidence, that brings me to my question, which is away from bullying, sorry, or emotional intelligence. My 6-year-old son, how do I help him not get hurt so easily? Any little thing that gets said 2 days later comes out, he's still hurting about it. Or he didn't get as many treats, or he was the last one on the line, or something like that. He gets hurt. I hear it, but it's not a big deal.
I think one of the things that's important to introduce now is that children are different in terms of temperament, in terms of constitution. We have some children that are just born that are much more withdrawn or more shy or more reluctant or easily hurt. And this is, you know, we have more than, oftentimes we have 2, 3 kids, and we say, oh my God, you know, I'm the same mother, I'm the same father, but they are so different. And that has to do with saying that environment is important, but it's not the only thing that's cooking here. That children's constitution and their biological makeup also plays a factor in this. So if your child happens to be more sensitive to the impacts of what goes on, there are some children that, you know, they go into a group and they stand out on the sidelines and they observe and they wait and they don't enter in. You know, they kind of analyze the whole situation and they check everybody out, and then they start to walk in. And then we have other kids that run into a group like a bull in a china shop, and they're just in there. But you know, it talks about the differences between and among children. So if your child is more sensitive, then it involves being able to sit down with him or her and talk about how they're feeling and what are some things that we can do when that happens. Why do you think that happened? And is it a boy or a girl?
Boy.
Well, getting your son to be able to say, well, why do you think that they didn't give you the treat that you wanted? And getting him to share that, and then you kind of introduce a little bit more reality as to, well, maybe they didn't even notice that you wanted it as a possibility, whatever, and it's not necessarily something that has to be taken personally. Some things should be taken personally in terms of if it is directed at you in a personal manner, but sometimes things happen that we take personally that really isn't about us. And that is as important to be able to help our children discern and decipher when those kinds of things are happening in terms of a reality check. Any other questions? Well, I thank you very much for having me. This has been a pleasure, and I wish you lots of luck. Being a parent is one of the hardest jobs we'll ever do, but most rewarding.